My name is Gloria. Gloria and Sutton. I am 71 years old, and until 8 weeks ago, I had never once in my life raised my voice at my daughter. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest of this story. I want you to sit with it for a moment, because it matters. The kind of woman I was, the kind of mother I had been, shapes everything that happened on that particular Saturday morning, and everything that came after. If you do not know who I was before that morning, you cannot fully understand what I did, or why I had to do it. I was a quiet woman. Not a weak one. There is a difference between those two things that I have spent many years learning to articulate. Quiet means you choose your battles. Quiet means you think before you speak. Quiet means you understand that not every provocation requires a response. Weak means you have no response to give. I was never weak. I was sometimes, I think, too patient. I believed, for most of my life, that patience was the highest virtue in a family. I believed that if you simply loved long enough and gave generously enough and held the door open wide enough, the people you loved would walk through it and meet you. I am still learning, at 71, which beliefs served me and which ones were just beautiful lies I told myself in difficult seasons. I taught second grade for 22 years at Ridgeline Elementary School in Chattanooga, Tennessee. 22 years of small people arriving in September not quite knowing how to read and leaving in June with the whole world cracked open in front of them. Nobody tells you what teaching does to you in return. 22 years of watching children arrive at problems, some with fury, some with tears, some with patient strategic calm, teaches you to read a room. To understand what someone is actually asking when they ask the surface question. To know the difference between I don't understand this and I am afraid of this. I learned to be afraid of very few things. What I did become over those 22 years was a careful observer. Of people. Of patterns. Of the distance between what someone says and what they mean. Harold always said I could read a room faster than anyone he had ever known. I would laugh it off when he said it, but it was true. It was the teacher in me. 22 years of paying very close attention to the people in front of you leaves a mark. It becomes the way you move through the world. And what I had been observing, in the long months of Harold's illness and the weeks since his death, was something I had tried very hard not to name. But I am getting ahead of myself. My husband Harold died on a Tuesday morning in late March. He had been sick for 2 years, a slow and terrible kind of sick, the kind that gives you just enough hope to keep going before it takes a little more of the person you love. Prostate cancer, they said at first. Treatable, they said, most likely. And for a while it seemed that way. There were good scans and bad scans, treatments that made him exhausted, treatments that made him nauseated, and through all of it Harold remained Harold, steady, a little wry, quietly determined, still interested in the birds at the feeder outside the kitchen window even when he could barely lift the binoculars to his eyes. And then it spread. And the conversations shifted, as they do, from treatment to management, and then from management to comfort, and then to the particular terrible kindness of simply being present for someone you love while they go somewhere you cannot follow yet. Harold was 68 years old when he died. We had been married for 44 years. I was 24 when I married him. He was 26. He had just taken a position at a civil engineering firm in Chattanooga, which is where we both grew up, and I was in my second year of teaching second grade at the elementary school 3 blocks from the school I had attended as a child. We were not wealthy people. We came from working families. His father had worked at a plant his entire career, my mother had cleaned houses and my father had driven a delivery truck, and we understood, both of us from early on, that the life we wanted would have to be built by hand, carefully, over time. We built it. It took 44 years and it was not always easy. There were seasons when the money was very tight and seasons when the children were exhausting and seasons when Harold and I were so different from each other that we had to consciously choose each other all over again, deliberately and without guarantee. But we did choose each other. Every time. Right up to the very end. We had 2 children. Our son Derek came first, 14 months after the wedding. He arrived pink and furious and absolutely perfect, and Harold stood beside me and looked at this new small person with an expression I had never seen on his face, something entirely unguarded, entirely without strategy, and I thought, this is going to be the best thing we ever do. 3 years later came Pamela. Pamela. I have spent the last 8 weeks turning that name over in my mind like a stone in my palm, feeling its weight, feeling its edges, trying to reconcile the girl I raised with the woman she became, or more precisely, with the woman she revealed herself to be on that particular Saturday morning when she sat at my kitchen table and reached across it and took something that was not hers to take. She was a complicated child, Pamela. Not difficult, there is a difference between those words that matters. She was spirited and intelligent and had, from a very early age, a strong instinct for how things worked, who held the power in any given situation, and how to position herself accordingly. At 5 she negotiated the terms of her bedtime. At 10 she had organized the neighborhood children into a functioning council with elected positions and majority vote procedures. At 17 she ran the school newspaper with an efficiency that would have impressed a city editor twice her age. These qualities thrilled me. I loved these things in her fiercely, the way you love the parts of your children that are both themselves and beyond themselves. What I did not see clearly enough, for too long, was the way those same qualities, the gift for reading systems, for understanding leverage, for knowing where the power was, could, under the right circumstances, be turned in directions I had not anticipated. Could be turned, in the long shadow of grief and financial pressure, toward her own mother. But I was still learning to see that when Harold was alive. I was still explaining it away. And what explaining it away cost me is part of this story, and I do not tell it with bitterness but with honesty, because honesty is what I promised when I sat down to tell you this. When Harold died, I felt the floor come up and hit me. That is the only way I know how to describe it. Not a gradual falling, not a slow slide. An impact. He was there and then he was not, and the house we had lived in for 31 years, the house where Derek had his first nightmare and Pamela scraped her knee on the back step and Harold built the deck in the summer of 1998, became overnight a place I did not recognize. His coffee cup on the counter. His reading glasses folded on the end table. His old denim jacket on the hook by the back door, the one I had begged him to donate to Goodwill for 15 years and which I now could not imagine touching, much less removing. I did not get out of bed for 4 days after the funeral. I want to be honest about that. I am a woman who has always been proud of functioning. Of showing up. Of being the person others could rely on. For 4 days I was none of those things. I lay in the bed Harold and I had shared for 31 years and I looked at the ceiling and I let grief be as heavy as it was, because I knew, with the particular knowledge of a woman who has watched other women try to outrun grief, that you do not survive it by being stronger than it. You survive it by being willing to go through it completely. On the 5th day I got up. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the cardinal at Harold's bird feeder, and I heard his voice in my head, not a hallucination, not a visitation, simply the way a person you have loved for 44 years can speak to you from inside your own knowing of him. I heard him say what he had said to me a dozen times in those last months. Gloria. Don't you stop. Not stop living. Not stop moving. Not stop being yourself. He knew me well enough to know where grief could lead for a woman like me. He had watched me channel everything, every feeling, every worry, every season of difficulty, into the care of other people, and he knew that without him there to redirect me toward myself I was at risk of making my grief into a vocation. Of devoting whatever was left of my life to the tending of his memory at the expense of my own continuation. He did not want that. So on the 5th day I got up. In the weeks that followed I did what I have always done when the road is difficult, I kept going. I answered the cards. I returned the calls. I sorted Harold's things carefully, over many evenings, touching each object long enough to remember it and then placing it in the box or the bag or the keep pile, because keeping has to be selective or you end up living in a museum rather than a home. I built a daily structure. Small things. Anchors. Derek called me every morning for the first 6 weeks. He lives in Asheville with his wife Carol and their 3 children, Thomas, who is 15 and already taller than Harold was, Lily, who is 12 and reads everything, and young Marcus, who is 7 and has decided his life's calling is to become a dinosaur. Derek is a good son and a steady man, and in those morning phone calls he did not offer advice or make plans or suggest arrangements. He simply called and asked how I was and listened to the answer. That was exactly right. Pamela called less often. She is a busy person, or presents herself that way. Her life in Atlanta is full, her husband Terrence's business consulting firm, their social calendar, their daughter Brianna's schedule, the various committee memberships Pamela has always maintained. I did not take the infrequent calls personally. Pamela has always shown love through action rather than presence, and I had made peace with that long ago. What I did not know was what kind of action she was preparing. I need to tell you about something that had been happening since before Harold died, because it is part of the story even though it moved so quietly I could have missed it. Looking back now, I see it clearly. At the time, I was choosing not to see all of it, because seeing it would have required me to say something I was not ready to say. The shift in Pamela had started small and early. A question about the house, perhaps 2 years ago, when Harold's diagnosis was still relatively recent. What did I think the property was worth now, with the market being so strong? She asked it casually, as you ask a casual question, and I answered it, gave her my best estimate, mentioned that the neighborhood had appreciated significantly. Nothing alarming about that on its face. It is a normal thing for an adult child to wonder about. Then a question about the life insurance. Had Harold arranged for sufficient coverage? A friend of hers had been in a difficult position when her husband passed with a smaller policy than expected. She was asking out of concern. Of course she was. Then a question about whether Harold and I had updated our estate documents recently, because it was so important to have things in order. A question from a caring, practical daughter thinking about her parents' future. Each of these questions, alone, was reasonable. Together, over months, assembled into a pattern, they meant something different. They meant, what is there, and when, and who will it go to? I had said nothing. I had no proof of anything beyond my own reading of my daughter's face and her questions and the particular way her husband Terrence had started angling conversations toward the subject of real estate whenever we were in the same room. And I loved my daughter. I did not want to be the woman who named something that ugly without absolute certainty. But I watched. And when Harold died and the questions shifted from subtle to direct, the senior community website, the house's market value, the observation that a 71-year-old widow perhaps didn't need a brand new $28,000 vehicle, I understood that I had been watching the right thing all along. About 6 weeks after Harold died, I made a decision. I was going to buy a new car. This requires some explanation. Harold and I had shared one vehicle for the last several years of his illness. We had sold his beloved Navy pickup when the treatments made driving difficult for him and bought a used Camry together, practical, reliable, sensible. When he died, the Camry became mine alone. I drove it for 6 weeks. Every time I got in, I smelled him, cedar and motor oil and the peppermint gum he had chewed constantly since the day he quit smoking in 1991. It was not an unpleasant smell. It was a heartbreaking one. Every errand became an act of grief. Every trip to the grocery store was a reminder of absence. I did not want to be ungrateful. The Camry was a perfectly good car. But Harold had told me not to stop. And the Camry, for me, had become a place where stopping lived. I went to a Toyota dealership on a Wednesday morning in early May, 3 days after what would have been our 44th wedding anniversary. I wore my good blue blazer. I had spent several evenings doing research, consumer reports, reviews from drivers my age, safety ratings, fuel economy, because I have always been a thorough person and grief had not changed that about me. The sales associate who helped me was a young woman named Destiny. She was perhaps 28, with a calm, careful professionalism that I appreciated enormously. She did not talk to me at a raised volume or adopt the slightly exaggerated patience that some younger people use around women of a certain age. She listened to what I wanted and showed me what she had. I drove 2 models. The first sat too low to the ground, my knees would protest within a year. The second was a pearl white RAV4 with heated seats and a panoramic sunroof and a reversing camera and enough safety technology to make Destiny clearly enjoy explaining it. I sat in the RAV4 in the dealership parking lot for several minutes after the test drive, engine idling, hands on the wheel. Hope. That is the word for what I felt. Not happiness, exactly. Not joy. Something quieter and more durable. The particular feeling of a door standing open. The price was $28,000 after the trade-in value of the Camry. I had the money. Harold and I had been careful, consistent savers, the kind who paid the mortgage off 12 years early and kept 6 months of expenses liquid and did not spend on things that did not matter. The life insurance had been substantial. I was not wealthy by any dramatic standard, but I was secure, and that security had been earned, hour by hour and year by year, through decades of work and discipline and the particular form of faith that believes the future is worth preparing for. I signed the papers. I had the registration put in my name only. Gloria and Sutton. Sole owner. When Destiny handed me the keys, I drove home on the back roads with the windows down, the warm May air coming through, and I cried quietly and briefly for Harold, because he would have had 17 opinions about this car and I wanted to hear all of them. Then I dried my eyes and turned on the radio and let the road be what it was. I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment looking at the pearl white RAV4 in the afternoon light. Then I called Derek. He answered on the second ring. He laughed when I told him, that big, warm, delighted laugh he has had since he was a boy, and asked about the color and the features and whether it had Apple CarPlay. I told him I did not yet fully understand what Apple CarPlay was, but apparently yes. We talked for 20 minutes. He said he was proud of me. I told him not to be dramatic. We both laughed, and when I hung up, something in my chest that had been clenched very tight for 6 weeks eased just slightly. Then I called Pamela. She did not answer. I left a voicemail. Warm, enthusiastic, the way I had always tried to be with her, because Pamela responds to warmth in a way she doesn't always respond to directness, and I had known this about her for 53 years. I told her about the RAV4, about the heated seats, about how I had felt something I hadn't felt in months when I sat in it in the dealership. I said I loved her and hung up. She did not call back that evening. She called the next morning. And I should have noticed, I should have let myself notice, the particular flatness in her voice when she said, "I'll come up this weekend. We need to talk." Not, "I'm so glad, Mom." Not, "Tell me everything about it." Just, "We need to talk." Of course, I said. Come anytime. She arrived on Saturday at 8:30, earlier than expected. I heard tires on the gravel and looked out the window and saw a silver rental sedan. She had driven up alone, no Terrence, no Brianna. I noticed that. A thread of unease that I set aside, as I had set other things aside, because I had always given my daughter the benefit of every doubt I had. She came up the porch steps and we embraced. The hug was slightly shorter than usual. We went inside. I had made biscuits. I offered coffee. She sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the RAV4 in the driveway, and something moved across her face. Not admiration. Something that took longer to arrive, something that assessed. "It's nice," she said. "Thank you. I really love it." She was wearing her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. I recognized that ponytail. It was the one she wore when she had made up her mind about something and was ready to present it. I had seen it on the morning she told us she was changing her major. I had seen it when she announced her pregnancy. I had seen it at various decisive moments in her adult life. Pamela in a pulled-back ponytail meant Pamela had prepared her argument. "Mom," she said. "I've been thinking." "About what?" I poured the coffee. I set the biscuits between us. The morning light came through the window and caught the steam rising from the cups and everything looked, for one brief moment, exactly as ordinary as any Saturday had ever been. "About your situation," she said. There was that word. Situation. The word that reduces a life to a problem. She explained that she and Terrence had been talking. That the house was too large for one person, the maintenance too demanding. That with the money from a sale, combined with the insurance and the savings, I would be very comfortable in a senior living community near them in Atlanta. She had looked at the website, it was beautiful, I would have company and activities and medical support on site. She said I didn't need the car. She said I didn't need any of it, really. Not at my age. I sat across the table from my daughter and I listened to her tell me, with great efficiency and what I am certain she believed was love, that my life as I had built it was no longer appropriate. That she and her husband had discussed it and reached a conclusion. That the correct course of action was for me to sell my home, surrender my independence, and relocate to a facility they had identified on a website. And then she reached across the table. She picked up my keys. They were on the little ceramic dish Brianna had painted for me at a pottery class, sunflowers, bright yellow and a little lopsided, exactly as a 9-year-old paints sunflowers. My keys on Brianna's dish, and Pamela's hand closed around them with a naturalness, a confidence, that told me she had anticipated doing this before she sat down. "I need the car for the drive back to Atlanta," she said. "My rental has an engine problem." I said, "Those are my keys." She said, "I know, I'll return it next weekend." I said, "Put them down." And she stood up and walked to the door. I followed her. I stood on my porch and said her name, clearly, twice. She did not turn around. She got into my pearl-white RAV4 and started the engine and backed down my driveway and drove away. I stood on my porch and watched her go. The cardinal came to the bird feeder. The neighbor's lawn mower started up. The street was entirely ordinary and my daughter had stolen my car. I do not use that word carelessly. Theft is the precise word. She took my property without my consent, after I asked her to stop. That she is my daughter changes the grief of it. It does not change the word. I went inside. I sat at my kitchen table. The biscuits were cold. The coffee was cooling. Brianna's dish sat empty, the sunflowers bright and lopsided and innocent. I sat for a long time. And then something happened that surprised me. I did not cry. I had cried at almost everything in the 8 weeks since Harold died. His handwriting on a grocery list. A song on the radio. The bird feeder receipt filed in his cabinet, neatly labeled. Every day held some small ambush. But sitting at my kitchen table that morning, watching the empty dish, I did not cry. What I felt instead was cold and clear. The feeling of someone who has seen something coming and made herself ready. And here is why I was ready. I need to tell you about Margaret. Margaret Holloway has been my closest friend for 38 years, since the September morning our children started kindergarten together and we stood at the chain-link fence and she said, very dryly, "They tell you to treasure every moment. No one tells you which ones," and we laughed and have essentially not stopped talking since. When Lloyd Holloway died 4 years before Harold, I sat beside Margaret through everything that followed. She had worked for 20 years as a paralegal before she retired, and she found herself navigating, in the rawness of fresh grief, a legal situation that had not been prepared the way it should have been. Lloyd's children from a first marriage complicated the estate. Questions arose that should have been settled long before they had to be settled in that raw moment. Well-meaning people in conflict become something that feels very much like betrayal, and that is what Margaret experienced. I made a private decision while watching Margaret. If and when it was my turn, I would be prepared. When I bought the RAV4, the same evening I registered it in my name alone, I felt a whisper of something, barely more than intuition, the trained attention of 22 years in classrooms, and I called Margaret. "Come over," she said immediately. "Tonight. Bring the paperwork." I brought the title, the registration, the purchase agreement. Margaret sat across from me with her reading glasses and a legal pad and we talked for 3 hours. She asked me careful questions about Pamela and Terrence. About conversations they had initiated. About their questions regarding the house, the insurance, the savings. She listened with the attention of someone who recognizes a pattern she has seen before. "There's a lawyer I want you to call," she said. "Elder law. He's careful and honest and has no interest in billing you for things you don't need." His name was Samuel Whitfield. He had an office in Knoxville, 40 minutes away. I drove to see him twice. He was methodical and patient, with the particular quality of someone who has sat across from many older women in difficult situations and has learned to respect what they have already survived. He explained my options clearly. He did not minimize anything, and he did not catastrophize. Together we prepared a packet of documents. The first was a notarized certification of ownership. The vehicle title, the registration, the purchase records, all certified, all confirming that the Pearl White RAV4 was registered solely in my name and that any operation of the vehicle without my explicit written permission was legally unauthorized. The second was a letter from Samuel's firm, signed and notarized on his official letterhead. It explained, clearly and without ambiguity, that unauthorized use of a vehicle valued over $10,000 constitutes a Class D felony under Tennessee law, and that I was fully prepared to file a report with the Chattanooga Police Department should such circumstances arise. The letter named no one. It did not need to. The third document was a revision of my will. This one required the most thought and caused me the most pain to sign. Harold and I had made our original will together 20 years ago. In it, Pamela and Derek divided everything equally. It had never occurred to me to arrange it any other way. But I sat in Samuel's office and I thought carefully about what I had been observing for the past several months. The questions about the house's value. The questions about the insurance. Terrence's casual inquiries about real estate in general, about what one might expect to receive for a property in my neighborhood. Questions that had reasonable explanations, individually, and a less reasonable explanation assembled together. I changed the will. Derek remained. Pamela was removed, not as punishment, I explained to Samuel, but as protection. As a statement that I had seen what I had seen and was not going to pretend otherwise. In Pamela's place, a scholarship fund at Ridgeline Elementary, in Harold's name. And a small animal rescue organization in Knoxville that I had discovered Harold had been quietly donating to for 15 years. I found the records in his files after he died, 15 years of consistent modest checks, never mentioned to anyone. That discovery had made me love him so acutely I had to sit down. Fourth, a sworn affidavit stating that I was of sound mind, making these decisions freely, in full possession of my faculties. Samuel attached the results of a recent cognitive assessment from my doctor's office. The assessment was thorough and unambiguous. I was, as my doctor put it, sharp as a tack. At the end of our second meeting, Samuel slid all of these documents into a large manila envelope. He sealed it. He wrote on the outside, in his measured handwriting, "In case of emergency." I drove home that afternoon with the envelope on the passenger seat. I pulled into my driveway. I sat in the car for a moment. I opened the glove box. I placed the envelope inside. Part of me hoped I would never open that glove box for any reason but to retrieve my parking pass. Part of me knew, the careful observer, the woman who had been paying attention for 71 years, that hope and preparation are not the same thing, and that the prepared part of me was right to be prepared. I closed the glove box. Now, sitting at my kitchen table with cold biscuits and the empty sunflower dish, I picked up my phone. Pamela had been driving for perhaps 40 minutes. She would be on the interstate, southbound, in my leather seats with my heated steering wheel and my panoramic sunroof. She would be telling herself that her mother had been difficult, as her mother could sometimes be, but that it would settle. That next weekend she would return the car and they would have a reasonable conversation and her mother would come to see the logic of the senior community in Atlanta, or something like it, once the emotion had cleared. She did not know what was in the glove box. I opened my messages. I found her contact. I typed 4 words. Check the glove box. I pressed send. I put the phone on the table and folded my hands and waited. The first call came 11 minutes later. I watched my phone vibrate against the wood and I did not answer. The second came 90 seconds after that. Then a third. Then a fourth. Then 9 minutes of silence that I spent at the kitchen window watching the cardinals at Harold's bird feeder, two of them, having a small dispute about territory that they seemed to be resolving with a great deal of energy and very little actual violence. Then a text message arrived. Mom. What is this? There are legal documents in here. Call me. I did not respond. 2 minutes later, Mom, these are from a lawyer. I don't understand. Please call me right now. Then, after 4 more minutes, I found the will. Mom. Please. I'm pulling off the highway. I'm coming back. I read that one twice. Then I typed 3 words. Bring my car. Her reply came immediately, I'm already turning around. I'll be there as fast as I can. I promise. Please just talk to me. I put the phone in my pocket. I went to my bedroom. I looked at myself in the mirror on the back of the closet door. 71 years old. Silver hair. Harold always said the silver suited me better than the brown had, which I had not believed at the time and had come to believe. Wrinkles around my eyes from decades of Tennessee sun and decades of reading in insufficient light and decades of smiling at children who needed someone to smile at them. Hands that had graded 22 years of spelling tests and made 44 years of Harold's breakfasts and held his hand through 2 years of treatment and were holding themselves steady, right now, in this moment. I changed into a burgundy dress Harold had always liked. I put on the pearl earrings from our 40th anniversary. I combed my hair. Not out of vanity. Out of intention. Out of the belief, which I had held all my life and hold still, that how you present yourself to a difficult moment is a kind of statement. I was not going to be the grieving woman my daughter had decided she could manage. I was going to be myself. Fully myself. The woman I had always been. I called Margaret and told her quickly, the keys, the text, Pamela coming back. Margaret said, "Oh, Gloria," in the voice of someone who feared this and is not glad to be right. I said, "Don't be sorry, I'm ready." She said, "I'll have my phone in my hand. Call me the second she leaves." I called Samuel Whitfield. He walked me through the options calmly and thoroughly, the report that could be filed, the felony classification, my complete legal standing, and then he said, "You have time. The statute of limitations gives you a year. Talk to her first. See what you learn." He added, before we hung up, "You protected yourself with perfect clarity. Whatever happens in that conversation, you are not the one who did anything wrong." I thanked him and went to sit in Harold's armchair. I had not sat in it since the day he died. The cedar and motor oil smell of it, his particular smell, was still there, not as strong as it had been, fading a little more each week, and I sat in it and let it be too much for a moment and then let myself be in it anyway. Because I was done avoiding the things that were too much. Too much was where I lived now, and the only path was through. She pulled into the driveway at noon. I heard my engine, its particular quiet, a sound I had barely had a month to learn and already knew the way you know a voice, and I watched from the window as Pamela parked in exactly the spot she had taken the car from. That small symmetry. Someone trying, in the only way available to them in that moment, to put something back. She got out of the car. She was holding the manila envelope against her chest. Her ponytail was still in place, but something in her posture had fundamentally changed. She looked compressed. As if several things she had been carrying had been removed and she had not yet figured out how to stand without them. She rang the doorbell. I counted 10 seconds before I answered. When I opened the door, she said, "Mom," in a voice that held approximately 17 kinds of pain compressed into a single syllable. I said, "Come in," and stepped aside. We went to the living room. She placed the manila envelope and my keys on the coffee table between us. My keys on the coffee table rather than Brianna's sunflower dish. They had not yet earned their way back to the dish. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I read everything, she said. I know. The letter from the attorney. Yes. And the will. The word came out carefully, as if it had to be handled. Mom. I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me? If you were this worried, why didn't you just talk to me? I let the question sit for a moment before I answered it. Pamela. You came to my house this morning. You sat at my table and ate my biscuits, and then you reached across and took my keys after I told you not to. You did that while I have been a widow for 8 weeks. While your father's coffee cup is still in the cabinet and his jacket is still on the hook by the door. Does that sound like the behavior of someone who would have responded differently if I had simply raised my concerns? Color came into her face. That's not fair. Maybe not. But it's accurate. A long silence. The lawn mower outside had stopped. The house was quiet. The will, she said. You cut me out. Yes. Mom. Pamela. I leaned forward slightly. Not aggressively. Deliberately. Tell me something. And I need you to tell me the truth, because I think we have run out of comfortable conversations for a while and what is left needs to be real. Tell me about Terrence's business. She went very still. Tell me what's been happening, I said. Because I think that is the thread underneath this morning that I have not been told about. I think there is something that explains the house questions and the insurance questions and the website for the senior community in Atlanta. A silence long enough to be a kind of answer on its own. It's been a hard year, she said at last. The efficiency was entirely gone from her voice. She sounded, for the first time in this whole terrible morning, like my daughter. Like the girl who used to sit at this same table when something had gone wrong and needed to talk about it. There are some significant debts. Terrence's firm has lost several major clients. We've been managing, but it's been frightening. And I. She stopped. And? I said gently. She met my eyes. And when Daddy got sick, and then when he died, and I thought about the house and the insurance and what you would do with all of it, I didn't think about it the right way. I thought about it in terms of what it might mean for us. For our situation. And I'm ashamed of that. I am genuinely ashamed of that. The room was very quiet. Thank you, I said. For saying it honestly. She blinked. You're thanking me? It is the first completely honest thing you've said since you arrived this morning, I said. Yes. I'm thanking you for it. She began to cry then. Quietly, in the way she always cries, as if she is asking permission from herself with each increment. I'm not a bad person, Mom. You are not a bad person, I said. You are a frightened person who made very bad choices. Those two things are not the same. But they can both be true at the same time. She wiped her eyes. What happens now? I sat up straighter. Now I tell you what is required. Not requested. Required. She nodded. First. You speak to Terrence tonight and you make clear to him that my estate is not a financial solution to your difficulties. Whatever is happening in your business, you handle it through means that do not involve what Harold and I spent 44 years building. We did not save and sacrifice and plan so that our security could be dismantled to cover someone else's financial decisions. Even the financial decisions of someone I love. She nodded. Second. I want you to see a therapist. Individually. I want you to spend real, serious time with a professional understanding how you arrived at this morning. Not just what happened today, but the months of questions about the house and the money and the insurance. How a person who loves her mother arrives, step by step, at walking out of her mother's kitchen with her keys. Okay, she whispered. Third. Brianna is not touched by this. She is 9 years old and she has done nothing. She is welcome here whenever she wants to come. She gets biscuits and the bird feeder and all the ordinary love of a grandmother. That is not negotiable. Something opened in Pamela's face at the mention of her daughter. I know. I agree completely. And fourth. I stood. I picked up my keys from the coffee table. This house is my home. This car is my car. My savings are mine. My life is mine. I am in perfect health and of entirely sound mind, as documented. I am capable and experienced and fully able to manage my own affairs and make my own decisions about where I live and how I spend what I have earned. No one, not you, not Terence, not anyone, overrides that. Not now. Not ever. Do you understand me? Yes, she said. Say it back to me. She paused. Then, you are capable and independent and in charge of your own life. No one has the right to override that. That is right, I said. I walked to the front door and opened it. She followed me to the porch. She paused on the steps. Daddy would have been furious with me, she said. Yes, I said. He would have been. He would have been very precise about it, too. Harold was always precise when he was angry. Something moved through her face. He was, she agreed. And there was genuine grief in that agreement, the first grief I had seen from her in this whole morning, genuine sorrow for her father, for what she was doing in the shadow of losing him. Are you going to forgive me? I looked at my daughter. Her jaw that is Harold's. Her eyes that are mine. The girl I had sat beside through thunderstorms and heartbreaks. The woman I had watched from a hospital hallway for 14 hours when Brianna's blood pressure would not come down and who had been on the other side of that door not knowing I was outside it, exhausted and frightened, needing her mother. Forgiveness, I said, is not the same as before. Before is gone. What we do with what remains, that is determined by time and by what you do in it. And yes. The answer, eventually, is yes. She nodded. She walked down the steps. At the bottom she turned back. I love you, she said. The strategy was gone. All of it. Just the thing underneath. I know you do, I said. Show me. She got into the rental car and backed out slowly, and this time when she looked at me through the window her face held no certainty, only something raw and unresolved and, I believed, genuinely sorry. I watched until she was gone. Then I went inside, sat in Harold's armchair, and said out loud into the quiet house, I handled it. The cardinal came to the feeder as if on cue. 3 days after Pamela left, there was a knock at my front door in the late afternoon. I was in the kitchen making dinner, nothing elaborate, a simple chicken and rice that Harold used to love, and I heard the knock and went to the door and opened it. It was Terence. He was standing on my porch in his good jacket, the charcoal gray one he wore for presentations, holding his car keys in one hand. He looked terrible. Not physically unwell. But the kind of terrible that comes from several days of not sleeping well and understanding something about yourself that you had been successfully avoiding. Gloria, he said. Terence, I said. A pause. The late afternoon light was slanting golden through the maples at the end of the street. May I come in? He asked. I considered this. Terence and I have had a complicated relationship for 23 years. I had never entirely trusted him. Not because of anything specific he had done, but because of what he had never done. He had never treated me as someone whose opinion mattered for its own sake. I was, to Terence, Pamela's mother, which is a category rather than a person. He was perfectly pleasant in that category. But there was always, underneath the pleasantness, the sense that I was peripheral to whatever the real conversation was. This, I thought, looking at him on my porch, was the real conversation. Yes, I said. Come in. We went to the living room. I did not offer coffee. I sat in Harold's armchair. He sat on the sofa and put his car keys on his knee and looked at his hands for a moment before he looked at me. I owe you an apology, he said. I waited. Pamela told me everything. Not just what happened on Saturday, all of it. The months of questions about the house. The conversations we had about what you would do with the money and whether you needed this much space. She told me what she said to you. What she did. And she told me that she told you about our business situation. I nodded. I want you to know, he said carefully, that the financial difficulties are real. That part was not invented. We have had a very hard year and I have not managed things as well as I should have. And somewhere in the middle of that, I began to think about resources. About what was available to us. And I allowed Pamela to go in a direction that I should have stopped. You encouraged it, I said. Not unkindly. Simply accurately. He met my eyes. Yes. I did. I told myself it was practical. That we were looking out for you. That a 71-year-old woman alone in a big house was a genuine concern and we were just being responsible family members. He paused. I think I believe that a little. I also think I was rationalizing. And I think Pamela took that rationalization and ran with it in a way that went further than I expected, and I didn't stop her when I should have. The room was quiet. Through the kitchen doorway I could smell the chicken and rice. Terrence, I said. I am going to ask you a question and I want a straight answer. Okay. Did you tell Pamela to take the car? A pause. No. That was her decision. I didn't know she was going to do that until she called me from the highway and told me what had happened and what was in the glove box. Another pause. I told her she needed to turn around immediately. Which she had already decided to do. Because of the legal documents, I said. Yes. Because of the legal documents. And also, once she had a few miles between herself and the decision, because she knew it was wrong. I looked at him. 23 years of holiday dinners and birthday parties and the long ordinary middle of a family life. 23 years of Terrence at my table, being pleasant and peripheral. I need you to understand something, I said. Harold and I built what we have over 44 years with careful choices and real sacrifice. It is not a resource for someone else's financial recovery. It is not a problem to be solved by absorbing our security into your own situation. Do you understand me? Yes, he said. And if there is ever again a conversation in your house about what Gloria might contribute or what might be done with her house or her car or her savings, you stop it. Immediately. You call it what it is. And then you call me and tell me that it happened. He looked startled. You want me to report to you? I want you to be honest with me, I said. If that includes reporting, then yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's fair. It is more than fair, I said. It is lenient. He nodded slowly. Gloria, I know I don't have the standing to ask this. But is there a path? For us as a family? For Brianna to have her grandmother without all of this between you? I looked at my son-in-law. He looked, in that moment, genuinely uncertain. Genuinely sorry, I thought. Or at least genuinely sorry for having been caught, which is sometimes where genuine sorry begins. The path is what comes next, I said. It is not a conversation. It is time. It is what you do with the months ahead. He stood up. He put his car keys in his pocket. He looked around the living room, Harold's armchair, the photographs on the walls, the bird feeder through the window. Something moved in his face that I had not seen there before. He loved this place, Terrence said. Harold did. You can feel it. He built most of it, I said. The deck, the bookshelves in the study, the stone path in the back garden. He was always making something. I didn't know that, Terrence said. And he sounded, for a moment, genuinely sorry that he hadn't known. That 23 years of being peripheral had cost him the knowledge of who Harold was. No, I said. You didn't. He left. I watched him walk down the path to his car and I stood on my porch until he was gone. Then I went back to the kitchen and finished the chicken and rice. I called Margaret that evening and told her about Terrence's visit. Well, she said, in her dry and measured way. He came. He came, I agreed. That's something, she said. It's not everything. But it's something. That is exactly right, I said. We talked for an hour. She told me about her week. She had started taking a watercolor class, something she had always meant to do and always found reasons to postpone, and now she was doing it and it was wonderful and she was terrible at it and it did not matter at all that she was terrible at it. She told me she had painted a bird and it looked more like a leaf and she had shown her instructor and her instructor had said, kindly and with visible effort, that the color sense was very good. Harold would have said the same thing to you, I told her. He would have, she agreed. He was always kind about the things that didn't need to be corrected. After I hung up I sat in the kitchen for a while in the evening quiet. The light had gone from gold to soft gray. The bird feeder was empty of cardinals for the night. The chicken and rice was good and warm and I ate it slowly, the way you eat when you are finally present enough to taste the thing you have made. The weeks that followed settled into something I had not expected. Not the grief quiet, which is empty and echoing. A quiet that had my own shape in it. Textured. Present. Derek came from Asheville the following weekend with Carol and all 3 kids. It was a long, loud, glorious day. Carol made her banana pudding. Thomas tried to explain the rules of some elaborate video game and I listened with full engagement and approximately zero comprehension. Lily and I read the same chapter of a book on the porch together, each with our own copy, which she had brought specifically so we could discuss it. Young Marcus informed me that he had decided that dinosaurs and grandmothers were both his favorite things, which I told him I considered the highest compliment I had ever received. In the evening Derek and I sat on the porch with sweet tea. He did not say anything about Pamela. He simply sat beside me and asked what I was thinking about next, and I told him about the trip I was planning. The Blue Ridge Parkway. Harold and I had talked about it for 30 years. He had a photograph in his study, found before we were married, origin unknown, of a mountain valley somewhere along that road in late September, the whole valley a burning bowl of orange and red and gold. It had hung in his study for as long as I could remember. He had always said someday. Someday we'll do that drive, Gloria. Before we're too old. We ran out of someday. But I had not. Derek offered to come. I told him no, gently but without ambiguity. This trip needed to be mine alone. Not lonely, mine. I needed to drive that road carrying Harold the way you carry someone when they are gone, not in their presence but in your own transformation by knowing them. I heard from Pamela twice in the 10 days after she left. The first was a text, I made an appointment with a therapist. First session is Thursday. I replied, good. The second was a longer message, sent late on a Friday, Mom, I've been reading some of Daddy's letters. The ones in the box you gave me years ago. I didn't know there were so many. He wrote about you so often. About who you were to each other. I feel ashamed of what I did. You are not a problem to be managed. You were the center of someone's world for 44 years. You are the center of mine too, even when I act like a fool. I love you. I read it 3 times. Then I called Margaret and read it to her. It's a start, Margaret said, in her dry and measured way. It is, I agreed. On the morning I left for the mountains, I stood in my driveway for a moment before getting in the car. The Tennessee morning was clear and cool, the maples down the street just beginning to turn at their very tips, the first hints of what was coming. I opened the glove box. The manila envelope was filed away in Samuel's folder in my cabinet. In its place I had put 2 things, a folded paper with all the overlooks Harold had circled in an old travel guide, and a photograph. Harold and I at a trailhead in East Tennessee, 30 years ago, packs on our backs, both of us laughing at something ridiculous Derek had said at 12 years old. We looked young. We looked happy. I'm going, I told the photograph. Every overlook you marked. I'm going to do the whole drive. I started the engine. The Blue Ridge Parkway is not a road for hurrying. It meanders and offers overlooks every few miles that require you to stop and simply stand in them, accepting that the world is much larger and more patient than your particular grief. I stopped at every overlook Harold had circled. I used his binoculars. I used the camera he had given me for my 65th birthday, the one I had never fully learned to use and was learning now. At one overlook I sat on a bench for 40 minutes watching cloud shadows roll across the valley below like something breathing, and I let the enormity of it work on me the way enormous things do when you let them, not diminishing you but recalibrating you, restoring a sense of proportion that grief compresses. At the inn in Blowing Rock I met a woman named Harriet. 73 years old, a retired librarian from Roanoke, widowed 6 years earlier. We sat on the porch after dinner with our sweaters against the mountain chill, rocking chairs creaking on the wooden boards, and we talked for 2 hours the way women of a certain age can talk when they recognize something of themselves in each other immediately, openly, without the need to justify or explain, with the ease of people who have already done the hardest surviving. She told me about her husband Edwin, a history teacher for 35 years who had loved this same road. I told her about Harold. I told her, in careful outline, about the morning with Pamela. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. "And you're here," she said. "I'm here," I said. "Then you did right," she said. "By yourself. And probably by her, too, even if it doesn't feel that way yet. The ones who don't push back don't give their children a chance to become something better." I turned that over in the mountain air. I had not thought of it in exactly that way, as something I had done for Pamela, not just for myself. The idea settled into me slowly, the way the right ideas do. "Harold would have said something similar," I said. "He sounds like a wise man." "He was," I said. "Impractically so, sometimes. He saw things before I was ready to see them." "The good ones always do," Harriet said. We rocked in our chairs. The stars above the Blue Ridge were extraordinary, indifferent and brilliant. A screech owl called somewhere in the dark woods below the inn. I woke before dawn the next morning and dressed quietly and walked out to a small field behind the inn that faced east over the hills. I arrived in the dark and sat on the cold grass with Harold's binoculars around my neck and his travel guide in my pocket, and I waited. The light came slowly. Gray first, then a peach warmth along the eastern ridgeline, then all at once the sun, enormous, patient, lifting itself above the mountains with the unhurried certainty of something that has been doing this for a very long time and has no anxiety about it, flooding the valley below with a warmth so particular that I felt it the way I have felt very few things in my life. Like a presence. Like being seen. I took photographs. Dozens of them. Knowing they could not capture it. Taking them anyway, for the record, for the proof. For the proof that Gloria and Sutton, at 71 years old, 8 weeks a widow, for weeks past the morning her daughter took her keys, was sitting in a field in the Blue Ridge watching the sun come up over mountains her husband had always wanted to show her, and was not broken, and was not finished, and was, against everything that had tried to make her smaller, entirely herself. I stayed until the light was full and the day was begun. Then I walked back to the inn and had breakfast and packed my bag and said goodbye to June and loaded the RAV4 and sat in the driver's seat. I opened the glove box. Harold's photograph. The trailhead. Both of us very young and very happy and laughing. "I did the drive," I told him. "Every overlook you marked. It was everything you said it would be. You were right about all of it." 2 hours from home, my phone rang through the speakers. "Pamela." I looked at the screen for a moment. Then I answered. "Hi," she said. "Hi." A pause. "Are you driving?" "Coming back from the mountains." "The Blue Ridge." Another pause, and in it something shifted. I could hear it like a small door opening. "That was the trip you and Daddy always talked about," she said quietly. "Yes." "How was it?" I thought about the field before dawn. The light coming over the ridge. Harold's binoculars. The photograph in the glove box. "Perfect," I said. "Exactly what it needed to be." A silence that held something being understood rather than said. "I'm glad you went," she said. "So am I. I had my second session on Thursday," she said. "The therapist has been asking me to think about the difference between loving someone and needing to control what happens to them. About why I feel more comfortable when things are managed. When there's a plan." A pause. "I'm starting to understand some things about myself that I would rather not understand." "That is usually how it works," I said. "I know." Then, quietly, "I'm sorry, Mom. Not just for Saturday. For the months before it. For treating you like a problem to be solved. You deserved better from me." I drove for a moment without speaking. The Tennessee landscape coming back to me, hills I had known my whole life. "I know," I said. "And I believe you mean it. Now you have to show me." "I will," she said. "How is Brianna?" The shift in her voice was immediate and total. "She lost a tooth. She wrote the tooth fairy a very serious note explaining that due to inflation the going rate has increased substantially and she expects full compensation." I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and unguarded. "That child is entirely yours." "She's yours too," Pamela said. "She wants to come in October. She wants to see the leaves." "Tell her yes," I said. "Tell her to pick any weekend. I will make biscuits. She will absolutely hold you to that." "That is the plan," I said. In the bottom drawer of Harold's desk, going through his study several weeks later, I found a small envelope with my name on it in Harold's handwriting. Not typed. Handwritten, in the careful print he used when something mattered. It was dated 4 months before he died, from a day when I had gone to run errands and he had been alone in the house for a few hours. I sat in his desk chair and held it for a long moment before I opened it. It was a letter. 1 page, front and back, written in a good period, his hand was steady, the letters even. The letter said, in part, "Gloria, I have been thinking about what I want to say to you and I have decided the only way to say it is directly, because you have always responded better to direct than to gentle, even when you thought you preferred gentle. You are going to be all right. I know you doubt this. I know the idea of all right without me seems like a category error, like being told the ocean is fine without the water. But you are more than you know yourself to be. You have always been. The children know it. Your students knew it. The women you have helped through hard times knew it. I know it perhaps better than anyone, having watched you up close for 44 years, which is not incidentally the best 44 years I can imagine having lived. You will be lonely. You will cry at things that make no sense. You will have mornings when the silence is genuinely unbearable. Go through all of it. Do not manage it. Do not make it smaller than it is. And then, and I mean this, Gloria, in the most literal possible sense, keep going. The road does not end because I am not on it. It continues. Drive it. All of it. Even the parts that scare you. Especially those. I love you with everything I had, and everything I had was never enough to say it adequately, and I would not change a single day. H. I sat in Harold's desk chair for a long time after I read that letter. I did not cry immediately. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and held it, and then I put it down on the desk and looked out the window at the back garden, at the stone path he had laid in the autumn of 2009, stone by stone, on his hands and knees, getting the level exactly right. Then I cried. I cried for a long time, in Harold's chair, in Harold's room, surrounded by his books and his maps and the accumulated evidence of a life's worth of careful attention to the world. I cried the way you cry when grief is complete, not shattered, not broken, but complete, like the last note of a piece of music that was everything it needed to be. And when I was done, I felt something I had not felt since before he got sick. I felt ready. Not ready for any particular thing. Simply ready. The way a road is ready, the way a morning is ready, the way a new page is ready. Open. The October weekend Brianna came was perfect in the way that autumn weekends in Tennessee can be perfect, cool and bright, the maples in full color, the sky a blue so clear it seemed almost theatrical. She arrived on a Saturday morning with Pamela, who stayed for 1 hour to drop her off and then left, because she understood, without being told, that this weekend was for Brianna and her grandmother and did not require adult supervision beyond the two of us. Brianna is 9 years old and has Harold's eyes, that particular shade of brown that looks almost gold in certain light, and she has a quality that I find entirely wonderful, which is that she treats everything she encounters with the same level of serious attention, whether it is a math problem or a roly-poly bug or the question of what we should have for lunch. Everything Brianna encounters gets the full consideration of a person who has decided the world is worth taking seriously. She arrived with a backpack and a pillow and a pillowcase she had sewn herself, which she informed me was part of a sewing unit at school. She showed me the seams with considerable pride and some accurate self-assessment of where the stitching had gone wrong. "It's not perfect," she said. "It doesn't have to be," I said. "It's the first one." She considered this. "Grandpa would have said the level matters. He always said you have to get the level right." I was startled and deeply moved that she remembered this. Harold had said it repeatedly and in many contexts, applying his engineering instinct to everything from picture hanging to pancake flipping. "That's right," I said. "But you can fix the level on the next one. The first one teaches you where the level needs to go." She thought about this. "Okay," she said, with the finality of someone filing information correctly. We made biscuits. Brianna is a methodical baker. She measures everything twice and takes the instructions entirely literally. We had biscuits and honey for breakfast and then we took Harold's binoculars out to the back garden and I showed her how to use them and we spent 45 minutes identifying birds, which Brianna approached with the seriousness of a field researcher, recording each one in a small notebook she had brought for exactly this purpose. "Grandpa watched birds," she said, writing down the name of a white-throated sparrow. "He did," I said. "He was better at it than I am. I am still learning." "You can learn things when you're old," she said, without any malice whatsoever, with simply the genuine inquiry of someone who is 9 and for whom old is a somewhat theoretical category. "You can learn things at any age," I said. "The learning doesn't stop. It just gets more interesting because you have more to compare it to." She wrote something in her notebook. I did not ask what. In the afternoon we drove out to a park along the Tennessee River with a long walking path through trees that were, that particular October, exactly as gold as Harold's photograph in his study, exactly the color of the valley in the image he had looked at for 30 years and said, "Someday." Brianna walked beside me on the path and asked questions about the trees, what kind, how old, why the leaves changed color, and I answered the ones I knew and admitted the ones I didn't, and she accepted this division with equanimity. At one point she stopped and looked at the light coming through the gold leaves and said, very matter-of-factly, "Grandpa would have liked this." "He would have loved this," I said. I said, "Check the glove box." She froze. And then she turned around. And now we begin again, carefully, with clear eyes and open hands and the particular kind of hope that has already survived everything that has tried to extinguish it. That is the only kind worth having.